So Charlotte, can you launch the local recording and then I'll do the cloud?
And
the local is launched. So
oh, it is. Cool. Okay, great. So I'm
subtitles.
gonna record
The
now.
subtitles. The
I'll also do that. Yeah, 1 second. Oh wait, no, that's not what I meant to do. Stop recording. Record to the cloud. Okay. And then also live transcript. Okay, great. Welcome everyone. Oh, hold on just 1 second. We are coming together for the second session of our panel, but now I can't find the title of it. Hold on 1 second. That's what happens when you have.
Okay, you send it to me, I will send it to you.
Okay, thank you.
So it's the same title as the first one.
But I can't find it.
I'll send it to you in a minute. Okay.
Thank you. I do want to put it in the recording actually, because I think it's important to do that. So give us just a moment.
Hold on a minute. I put it in the chat, right?
Yeah, thank you. Okay. Okay, thank you. Welcome everybody to our second session of the panel that we are calling Deciphering and Defeating the Censorship of Whose Narrative? Gender, Justice, and Resistance, a conversation with Leila Khalid. We had a session before this that covered a few different aspects of the topic, and we're gonna pick up in this session with an additional piece of the conversation. So the first thing that I'm going to do is introduce our two core panelists and give a little bit of a recap, not a full recap of what happened, what we discussed in the previous section. And then we're going to have a brief presentation from each of the panelists and then open for a conversation. There are the right number of people here to have a full and open conversation on the topics that we're focusing on right now. So let me just, let me do the introductions and then I will, again, before other folks speak, I'll just sort of recap and situate us. So our first panelist, Tomome Kinukawa, is a lecturer in the Department of Women's and Gender Studies at San Francisco State University. They've published in scholarly journals and other media, including the Journal of Women's History and Jinkinto Seikatsu. They're completing a book project that analyzes coloniality of the post-World War II Japanese medical system and presents a social, cultural, and political history of decolonial health movements among Zainichi Koreans. They hold a PhD in the history of science from the University of Wisconsin at Madison. And our second panelist is Rabab Abdulhadi. Born and raised in Nablus, Dr. Abdulhadi is the founding director and senior scholar of Arab and Muslim ethnicities and diaspora studies program at San Francisco State University, intended to become the 5th department in the College of Ethnic Studies there. Before joining SFSU, she served as the first director of the Center for Arab American Studies at the University of Michigan at Dearborn. Widely published as a scholar, activist, and 10-year UN-based journalist with over 80 articles, book chapters, a co-authored book, and several anthologies in 7 languages. She's the co-founder and editorial board member of the Islamophobia Studies Journal, policy advisor for Al-Shabaka, serves on the board of the recently formed International Islamophobia Studies Research Association, and additionally serves on the board of directors of National Students for Justice in Palestine, the advisory board of the US Campaign for the Academic and Cultural Boycott of Israel, and the executive committee of California Scholars for Academic Freedom. In addition to those academic awards, such as additional awards such as the Sterling Fellowship, the New Century Scholarship, and the Evelyn Shaker National Arab American Book Award, as a public intellectual, Rabab has been recognized by community honors, including but not limited to the Alex Oda Memorial Award, the Lucius Walker for Community Organizing Award, and the Courage Awards by Al Auda and American Muslims for Palestine. So those are bios on our panelists. And I will also just add that my name is Amaya Gelman, and I am in the Department of Social and Cultural Analysis at NYU. And I am very honored to be chairing this panel, and in fact, this series of panels. So just to give a little bit idea of the structure, in the previous panel, we had overview from Tamomi and Rabab of the struggle over this particular webinar with Leila Khalid and the larger set of issues within the neoliberal university and attacks on academic freedom and on scholars who are doing this work, and a little bit of discussion on what kind of discourse is being shut down, and what the role is of collaborations and collusions between big tech and the neoliberal university and donors and lawfare organizations and states, particularly Israel and the United States State Department. What we were doing in the last panel was talking through the structures. First of all, what are we trying to, what is the subject matter that is being taught? Like what are the ideas that are at the center of this and that are the subject of these forms of repression? And second, what are the structures by which repression is happening and what are some of the tactics? And we talked through that and actually sort of ended up in a larger discussion about what it all means. And in this session we set aside for a discussion about two things: teaching and how we respond to such attacks. So the core questions here are: what does this mean for teaching in the era of COVID and after, where so much of the university has been transferred to tech, to Zoom in particular? What does it mean for the American Studies Association, for ethnic studies? And that's a conversation that can be expanded. And the second set of questions is: what are we trying to do? What do we need to do in order to intervene? What are our obligations and our interests and our plans? So I will ask Tamomi and Rabab to start us off, each with a few minutes, and then everyone else is invited to both participate in the conversation and to pose questions or thoughts. Let's start.
Thank you, Maya. Rabab, would you like me to start, or would you like to go?
Please go ahead.
I guess what I have been thinking through this previous section, and what Maya just summarized, is that yeah, I mean, what I have been thinking a lot of, since last year is that this whole issue about academic labor, and it's how many of us identify ourselves as a scholar activists, and then work in the university. I'm a lecturer, and then I have witnessed since last year how Ahmed department, Arab, Muslim, and ethnicities and diaspora studies departments offer they're the open classrooms, and also teach Palestine program, and they have been offering so much, not only students on our campuses but also to a wider communities over decades. And I'm one of the privileged one to be working with them, but and learning all these innovative uses of actually the the online teaching, and also and many others, and also I have witnessed how labor means in academic and intellectual labor means in a program that is well under resourced because of the attacks and the department that has been like targeted by all these forces that Amaya just mentioned. And and I do think, I feel it is very important just to, at the very least, like it's very important to make the labor visible. I think that's before we can even start conversation, I think that is very important work to do, to acknowledge the nature of the labor that is involved, to kind of retain, or to expand the kind of the program that is like a community-based, justice-based. I just lost my thought, but in defiant against all these violent forces. And so I just thought, and then I didn't know myself, the amounts and also the nature of the labor that it goes into there before I worked with Rabab and others in the AMET program. So I don't know, maybe I was just stop there and rub off.
Okay, I think I wanted to actually maybe say three things by way of kind of framing. Is why Ahmed, and how does it really fit or doesn't fit in ethnic studies and American studies? Then I wanted to give a couple of examples, if that's okay, by way of kind of framing the conversation. So I think when we started Ahmed in 2007, and when SFSU recruited me, I was really thinking, and I was at the Center for Arab American Studies at University of Michigan, Dearborn. One of the things that attracted me to San Francisco State is the history of SFSU, in particular the longest student strike in the history of the US, led by the Black Student Union and the Third World Liberation Front in 1968. Started in November 1968, did not end until 1969. The students demanded several things, and they started an experimental college. The experimental college, if you think of Ahmed Open Classrooms now, it will be actually reflective of what the experimental college was like at that time. They were demanding decolonizing of the curriculum. They were demanding dissolving the boundaries between the university and the community. So the university is accountable to the community. Since the university, academics are always drawing information from the community and building their careers, but the relationship is not reciprocal, okay? And they wanted a college of third world studies. And so what was attracted me, and I want to start this because I was the director of the Center for Arab American Studies, and I always had discomfort with the American in the Arab American part, because I always wanted to decenter Americanness as not as indicative of what now the body and the research in American studies is all about, but to decenter Americanness as an area studies, similar to Middle East studies, Asian studies, African studies, European studies, what have you. And so I had a problem with area studies, going back to our critique of the Cold War and the rise of area studies during the Cold War. We can elaborate if you want, but I think you all understand what I'm talking about. My second issue was the whole question in post 9/11 2001, and this is the environment in which I was recruited for Michigan, for the Center for Arab American Studies, was centering Washington and Americanness, i.e. US-ness per se, to center everything around the world. So I had a very big discomfort with actually people will say 9/11, they don't say 9/11 2001. And I always say, hey, what about the Chilean coup d'etat in 1973? Why do you always think about 9/11? 9/11 is just one event that happened to the United States, but it is something that affects the whole world. Why is that the watershed moment? And we actually did an open classroom on September 11, 2021, called Whose Narratives? And we said 20 years since 9/11, 2001, to actually ask some of these questions. Why is the centeredness? And it has to do with sort of like an anti-imperialist anti-colonialist perspective of understanding what, quote unquote, the US, and my students always say America, and I always say, don't equate the US with America. Don't know, when you say the Americas, think about that this was the Western Hemisphere that was colonized in 1492. Today is Indigenous Peoples Day. Unfortunately, it's only one day. It's supposed to be Columbus Day, which is also a misnomer. Anyway, there's so many problematics about it. And so this is why I was actually very interested that San Francisco State represented third worldism, and thinking about centering third worldism, both Africa, Asia, and later on Latin America. If we think about Bandung in 1955, that then Latin America becomes part of it and Yugoslavia becomes part of it and so on. But also third worldism as centering is as well as third worldism within the US. So the Black Student Union and the Third World Liberation Front that came as a result of it, the Black Student Union was led by the Black Panther Party. The Black Panther Party never ever thought of Americanness or of being even, they didn't even like the terminology African Americans. I mean, there is a reason why the department is called Africana. It's not called African American. And they said Black because also they were trying to make a particular statement about what African diaspora might be, where diaspora is. And this is also in Ahmed, we say ethnicities and diasporas because we always are trying to disrupt and trouble the notion of where home is. It might be in the US, it might be in Arab or Muslim communities. Is it the Arab world? Is it Arab communities? What happens to the ethnicities within the Arab majority community? What happens to the non-Muslim majority, minorities in Muslim majority? How do we think about that? So this is the program was actually trying to account for kind of like troubling all these notions, but really think about third worldism, thinking against, speaking against settler colonialism, the US as a settler colonial project, thinking about against the history of US enslavement, kidnapping and enslavement of African people, thinking against Manifest Destiny, against the Chinese Exclusion Act, against the quote unquote internment or concentration camps of the Japanese in the Second World, against McCarthyism, against COINTELPRO. I mean, this was kind of like the place. And that one thing is against, but the other aspect of it, as we were talking about the last session, and I believe also Charlotte made that point, also against the resisting against a colonial condition, that colonial we can expand it around common hegemony of various isms, right? And thinking again about liberation as well. So there is two levels at least. And I know in my research on Palestine, I think about resistance and I think about liberation. So they're not exactly the same. They're very different from each other, but also thinking about the solidarities and the things that brought people together. So part of having the Ahmed Open Classrooms and part of it is to actually realize the vision, the spirit of 68, which inspired and the leaders of the 68, including the late Terry Collins, who was one of the legendary figures who passed in July, and huge loss to all of us, and was a great supporter of Ahmed, along with the other strikers from 68 who wrote multiple statements. And this is where the solidarity comes in, is to realize that vision. The second aspect of it is to actually think about how do we make in our classroom, engage in critical discussions of all narratives, critical discussion of colonial hegemonic narratives, as well as critical discussions of resistance narratives. So we are not necessarily idealizing what happened in the 60s, but we're also acknowledging that this was a very important stage and countering and standing against, which connects to the silencing aspect, standing against the ways in which the right wing of all its manifestations, Zionist, white supremacist, Christian evangelist, what have you, in various parts of the world have always tried to control the mind and try to actually have a battle over the mind, where the site is now today, the university, but it's not always the site because there's multiple organic intellectual experiences in different parts of the movements and so on. And this is what we were talking about earlier when Maral, you said that your work is about Iranian Student Association, ISA, in the 70s, and Organization of Arab Students, OSA, in the 70s as well. And they were very tight. They were very close with each other. They had each other's back. They supported each other. They've actually played a role at San Francisco State Strike and elsewhere. Berkeley too, because that was the site of the biggest OAS conference in 1975. And some of the people who've done that are actually some of my mentors and some of my people I've worked with, my comrades, people who mentored me into political organizing and so on before I even became an academic. So part of it, how do we think about that? How do we think about those moments about saying that, oh, today is the youth? When you say today is the youth, it actually idealizes youth per se, age, which becomes an ageist statement. But how do we also say that not everything in the past was the only thing that was right and correct and whatever and so on? And part of it is to analyze and criticize. Part of it is to also say, what is it that we want? So there is an activist component to the scholarship and the critical scholarship and pedagogy that we're engaging in, which manifests itself in the project Teaching Palestine that we've started around it. So this is kind of like bringing all of these together, these things together. So I believe, part of the silencing that's going on and what we would really need to talk about is that there is a problem with this particular agenda. There is a serious problem. The right-wing, white supremacist, neoliberal forces that control the world today, whether it is Biden in the White House or Trump before, who was a horrible, horrible picture. And of course, we are in a much better. So I'm not trying to kind of like say they're all the same, no. But I'm talking about the ways in which the systems are and the rise of neoliberalism as a way to justify and stop the welfare state, stop the ways in which people are responsible towards each other, stop the collectivity and so on. All of this stuff is connected with each other. There is a problem with this agenda that we're trying to do. There was a problem with the 68 moment. San Francisco State and other universities probably swore that we will never, ever allow another 68 moment to happen. We will never be caught to allow students to take over the university, basically because the students control the space. So if you're talking about like researching public space, civil society, social movements, and so on, you'll think about what happened with the public space. At that point, the students controlled the space, even though the university administration was arresting over 900 people were arrested, beating up people, bringing the cops. The governor of California was Reagan. I mean, all of these things were happening. The students controlled it. Every single rendition of movements after that, including at San Francisco State, sought to prevent that from going on, to recurring. And the program, and I mentioned Reagan because in the 1980, when Reagan came to power, one of the main agendas of the right wing was to challenge the discourses that were established in the 60s and shut down any particular critical moments. So if we think about that, this is the history and this is what they were trying to do and rewrite all the narratives about Palestine, the narratives about resistance, the narratives about what happened in the 68 and so on. It's kind of become, even today, it becomes like a Kumbaya moment. None of it was Kumbaya, none of it. Everything was very conflictual. It was a conflict time. It was fighting for each other. People actually understood. And today, and I'm going to kind of like just maybe end with this point. No, actually, I want to make another point. That today is the ways in which actually labor and management, the presentation, even at San Francisco State, that we're all one big happy family, even though there is real contestation over bread and butter issues, which are unions' main thing, bread and butter, about academic freedom, about the limits of the university. For example, San Francisco State, and I will give like an example, moved a lot of the grants to which we would apply as faculty, such as a grant, I was looking at my CV yesterday for another thing. It's called Instructional Related Activities, IRA. That way came out of the provost office. Now it's in student affairs. Now, the way the university is doing it is to say that we're serving the students. So the university becomes customer relations and the students are the consumers. So the relationship is quote unquote market economy, marketplace of ideas. That's what we're told again and again by the Zionists, by the way, and the university again and again. They keep reproducing it. And so it becomes a market. And if we think about the market, maybe we need to go to the classics and Adam Smith talking about quote unquote the invisible hand of the market that has been debunked by Marx and by Engels and by everybody we've studied and we talked about and so on. But it goes back to this to say that we're all one big happy family. It's just a little disagreement. We just have a little conflict here and there. So we can just have conflict resolution. We sit around the table. If we could just talk to each other, everything will be resolved. Bypassing the whole question of the real interest. And this is what I want to talk about. Material and immaterial interest. So it's not just material interest. It's not about your income and salary and so on. It's also your immaterial interest about the pursuit of happiness, your ability to actually exist and produce, be productive. If you have this space of mind to be productive without your labor being exploited, your labor being denigrated, your labor even being used again and again and again to undermine what you are trying to do. So this is actually this is one of the issues. So in this context, I think where we can actually talk about solidarities, we talk about the silencing, we talk about the attempt to take away academic freedom and name it academic freedom when it really has nothing to do with academic, and it has nothing to do with freedom. It has to do with some euphemistic neoliberal concept in order for them to pass some market economy of ideas some way. And in order for us to prevent our solidarities with each other, which I believe in our case, actually we succeeded in building incredible alliances, incredible solidarities and so on. But it is all these alliances and solidarities are either implicitly or explicitly built upon our ability to understand that there is a conflict, that there is a system of power, that they try to play things against based on their own rules. And if we play it against, we will never win because it's on their terms. It's not centered. It's not marginalized community-centered knowledge. It's their knowledge that we contest against, and then we would try to build this. So in this sense, I want to understand, what does it mean to have the repression? What does it mean to have the resistance? And what are the issues for us to think about liberation? And I was going to give examples from Bookmas and AAUP and Palestine Arab Muslim Caucus of the California Faculty Association, but I can leave that towards later on and leave it to my other colleagues to intervene and speak.
Thank you. I hope it's okay. I have been bottling up questions actually since the last session, and so everyone is invited to speak, but I hope it's all right to call myself. In the last session, we talked a little bit about what this means. You talked, first of all, about the importance of being able to have a conversation, the specific conversation with Leila Khaled that was that didn't just stop at the sort of boundary of like, this is terror and this is, here's an object of terror that we, must critique, but in fact to talk with her about what it meant to be perceived as a sort of figure in that way, how it was gendered, and all these sort of the richness of these ideas, and to be able to have those conversations in English and Arabic at the same time. So I think that, I wish that we could carry over into this, the sort of the feeling of newness and the essentialness of this knowledge, that it wasn't simply a conversation, just a conversation for the sake of a conversation, but that it was an exploration of ideas that normally are shut down. And with that in mind, because you were making the direct link to the 60s. I didn't realize that you had been recruited to do this work. Making the link to the 60s really made me think about the extent to which the circumstances have changed. It's not just that the university is more neoliberal than it was. It's also that the matrices of control of discourse are different than they were. They're much more heavily controlled, and now especially in the time of remote learning, controlled by tech. And so I wanted to ask how you see the difference between the issues that the ways, not just the ways that people were fighting, but what people were fighting for in demanding ethnic studies in the 60s versus what we're fighting for right now. What are it's not quite the same, right? There are many overlaps and similarities, but what is the sort of new turf here? And Tomomi, I wonder if you would want to speak to that. Like, what's at stake here that's not sort of traditionally what we understand as in the 60s, sort of doing the initial work of trying to displace a totally white narrative, but now we have a sort of enriched matrix of control, and we're still fighting liberation struggle. So I wonder if you could just characterize like what it is we're up against in the demand for ethnic studies, and also for making sure that it takes place in the context of both liberation struggles and others, in conversations about settler colonialism, about gender and sexuality, about power.
I can try to start, and then for about, I think if you can discuss this, that would be great. But I think what have been thinking about is that now there is a lot of like, attempt by administration and also Zionist organizations to neoliberalize ethnic studies in itself. And so like we talked about this in the last session, but for example, at the SFSU Division of Equity and Community Inclusion and Office of Diversity and Student Equity and Interfaith Programs, they have been like openly collaborating with the Zionist organizations. And also when we had we tried to reproduce our webinar in April this year at UC Merced, like there like equivalent offices also were like held like a counter program, which conflates like again like anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism, and like try to educate our students like as a counter I don't know, webinar against ours. And so I think that's like, and then of course the donors and the ways in which the private donors have so much say about like how even the ethnic studies and women and gender studies have to be run. And so that's like so I think my question is like how we actually strategize against that neoliberalization. And like I noticed that because of that, like I hear a lot of, and then so like people start to speak in the same language, like the Zionist language. And like one of the things, for example, there's a kind of ways in which they try to exceptionalize our open classroom on campus, and then say like, it's okay if you offer that as a kind of optional, like, webinar, but then it's not okay if it's a part of the classroom. And then there's a pressure to actually cater to students who might not like the webinar, and there's a pressure to kind of to make an optional assignment so that those students who don't like the classroom could actually write about the reasons why they don't want to attend the class and so forth. And so that's the kind of the pressure that exists on campus. And I don't think as discipline, women and gender studies, ethnic studies have really had real conversation about how to strategize against those forces. Like, of course we have like there's a union support and like, like all of comrades here like have been supporting, but I think there's a kind of I must say there's a silence about that issue, and so that's something we need to fight, like a collectively address. So yeah, I will stop there.
I can add just a couple of things to what Tsunami is saying, is that and especially in response to your question, Dr. Gilman, about the 60s and the circumstances. In the 60s, we had, if you think about like the women's movement, there was consciousness raising groups at Ohio State University, there was queer liberation, and there is all the, like books we studied in Buffalo, and all of that stuff that was going on, but was always counter the trend. It was actually counter against the powers that be. So at that point, there was, let's say, a coalescence between the struggles people were fighting and the very topic for which they were fighting. There was a lot of struggle against Eurocentric education, around masculinist understanding of knowledge, around quote unquote the glass ceiling. Again, there was, Stonewall is a very big moment in the history of queer liberation. So there is, and I'm talking about the US, that doesn't really apply necessarily everywhere around the world because there are different histories. And this is also part of what we're also trying to say. But I think part of the problem is that the people who actually were fighting, they get hired, then they become the gatekeepers for the very institution that gives them jobs, protects them, and so on. So one of the things we saw at San Francisco State, actually, especially last year, when we saw it increasingly with more and more attack against Ahmed, because one of the things that Ahmed was the new kid on the block. So we were not going to live by, and we were not invested in upholding any systemic ways, upholding the institution or whatever. I mean, we came in, and one of the things that I was really excited about, and the students and the community, we all came together because we were really, really trying to kind of like think about the past, think about the present, think about the future, connect with each, bring people from the community, bring people, because there was actually nobody at the university who knew the history. It was, all the history was in the community. And the younger students actually were looking to community elders, which is, you learn from history all the time and so on, and you think about it in the present. So this is where there were no rules for us. But at the time we came in, the neoliberal moment has already settled in. So people were already invested in careers, in promotions, in leaves, in course releases, in becoming institutional chairs and deans and provosts and president and so on. So actually our past president, Les Wang, who is an Asian American man, said at one of the events that we had for the College of Ethnic Studies that I used to fight against the man, now I am the man. And I wanted to kind of contest and say, President Wang, maybe you think you are the man, but the man is not in this room. There are bigger men around and so on. But I held my tongue because you're supposed to be polite towards your colleagues and especially towards the university president, who's the highest authority in the land there. But there is something about gatekeeping that I think it's really problematic, and we've seen it again and again and again. When people actually say that there is no place, and this is the second point that I wanted to actually expand upon what Tomomi was saying, Professor Kinakawa, is that to say is Layla Khalid and teaching Layla Khalid and a book and the film about Layla Khalid hijacker with a question mark, is that appropriate for the content of a classroom on women and gender studies? Or does it not belong? So then Tomomi has to spend so much time to kind of like draw on the writings of Angela Davis and Audre Lorde and June Jordan and this and that to actually say, of course it is. This is why it is. And I would say for me, actually, this has, and the reason, one of the articles I've written, which on the basis of which Tomomi invited me to speak in your class about this, is that I gave a keynote. There was one of the keynote speakers for a big conference at Queen's University on the 60s, and they put a book of anthologies. So when I got up and I said the 60s was this, it was actually on the anniversary of the 67 occupation, yet nobody remembered that. In the whole conference, like people were talking about the Weather Underground, about Mark Rudd, this was the story. Nobody was thinking about what was happening about Palestine, the rest of the world. So I went through the whole, what was going on in the region. And then I spoke about Layla Khalid, and I said that not only Layla Khalid was one of the people who actually really inspired me. I wanted to grow up to be another Layla Khalid. I didn't want to grow up to be a housewife. I mean, sorry, I really didn't want to grow up and cook and have receptions and dress up or whatever. And so this was my nightmare. I used to have nightmares about that when I was growing up. That's not what I wanted to do. I wanted to be part of history. I wanted to be part of public history, collective history. And then I spoke about number of women in Palestine, a lot of them from my hometown, Nablus, whom I call Jamilat Nablus, according to link them to the Jamilat of Algeria, the 4 women who were all first name were Jamila, who were tortured during the Algerian War of Liberation, from Jamila Boubacha to Jamila Bouhaired, and so on. And they were all arrested at one moment when I was actually growing up. They were all arrested, they were all tortured, imprisoned. They were actually subjected to sexual torture and so on. And they stood their grounds. And the way I was talking about it is that the ways in which the perceived role of women but in public, it's kind of like you stand and you just stand in a podium and you just get counted. How many women are there in particular government? Actually, this equation was subverted in the Palestinian resistance anti-colonial movement and other movements as well. But I was speaking about Palestine in the sense that when Layla Khalid in the film says, and she said, the interviewer who's a Palestinian asked her, what happened to you? You became, they hijacked a plane for you. And Layla Khalid said, oh, wow, they hijacked the plane for me. And the interpretation in all the media, all the writings, even the people who admired Layla Khalid at that time, before Sarah Irving book, the very small book about Layla Khalid, they were all saying that, oh, she's so docile. She could not even believe that a whole group would go and hijack a plane for her because she doesn't think she's worthy and so on. But you actually, if you listen to what she was saying, she said that I thought it was going to go to my head. So I went back to the camps to learn from refugee experiences, to remind herself that at 4 years old, she became a refugee and lost her home in Haifa. And so, and actually throughout, even the hijacking, when she hijacks the plane, she tells them, this is, you fly over Haifa. This is Che Guevara, Shadi Abu Ghazali Brigade. There is so much symbolism that connects different parts of the struggle for Palestine and different parts of the struggle around the world. So it wasn't really about hijacking per se, whether, as we said before, whether you agree or you disagree with the hijacking, the word is still out there. And I myself actually have a lot of thoughts about it, but that would require a whole discussion and citations from Arabic literature, resistance literature, and so on about what does it mean, because it wasn't only the Palestinians who hijacked. You know, Black Panthers hijacked, people hijack planes to Cuba. There's all the stuff that has happened, and not all of it is criminalized. Not all of it is vilified. Some of it is hailed as movement, and I'm not sure whether it should be held, it shouldn't be held. I don't know. That's a total different discussion. But to me, it was kind of like understanding what Layla Khalid was saying. Was she really saying that she was, oh, she doesn't really believe that she's important enough and so on. This is because of the Palestinian extra sexist, homophobic society that teaches women to be so docile and men are always there as bloodthirsty terrorists and misogynists with 100 wives and 72 virgins and blah, 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 all of this stuff? Or is it really that she's actually enacting some of the things that we do in the movement, in our movement, that even if you're doing something yourself, you don't say I, you say we. I mean, I always refer to Ahmed as we, I'm the only person, because it is a collective experience. It's reflective of a collective experience that you don't say I. You don't talk about the name of the individual, and people like cringe when you say that. People will say you need to put it in the I. You don't do it in the passive tense. I'm like, why? This is not the way we write. And so it's sort of like even a different sensibility to link that. And so when I gave that talk, actually one of the leading sociologists at that conference said to me, oh, how can we make it such a way so young women, and she looks at me, do not grow up to glorify violence and terrorism. And I was, oh my God, this is the same thing that my university president wrote in her 3 statements. It is the same colonial feminist trope that has been with us from the time of the Seneca Fall Convention, from Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony, when they criticized I.W. Wells, saying that you are not sufficiently feminist because you decided to take on the cause of lynching of Black men and argue against it. You're not really sufficiently feminist. They disregarded Frederick Douglass, who was saying women and Black should have the right to vote, not just women. I mean, it was the same kind of narrow tunnel vision that it was like, wow. And so I thought when I wrote that article, okay, we're done. We don't really need to keep talking about the women's role in the movement and women's role of this and that. It's done. We're finished. Move on. We need to move on to something more interesting. Actually, it turns out that in so many parts of the movement and so many parts of the academy, including in critical women, gender, and sexuality studies, this stuff continues. It's kind of like this stuff that's so cliche, so passe, it doesn't even make sense. It's kind of like, why do you ask why women join movements? Why you don't ask why men join movement? Why do you ask why straight men join movement, but you don't ask why queer people join movements? I mean, like, why is that a question instead of reversing it around? So we were trying to create different knowledges. We were really trying to ask different questions. And I believe that for the university, for the Zionists, of course, it was a no-no, because there is no way in hell, use my language, they were going to allow somebody like Layla Khalid, who is a feminist icon, who's worshipped around the world, who a lot of people actually, like even Muhammad Ali's daughter's name is Layla. I don't think it was coincidental. There's so many people I know that always, I name myself, even one of the strikers from 68, Damira Ahmed. When I met her in 2008, she says to me, are you the Palestinian sister? And I said, yes. She said, I named my daughter Layla Khaled. And I said, by the way, I have her biography. Do you want to read it? It's PDF. It's available online, by the way. And I think, Charlotte and other people actually posted it online. So it's available. So, go and read it. So there is so many, it was kind of like unacceptable for Layla Khaled to come into the classroom. And then the other aspect of it is that we were actually bringing these very well-known luminaries to meet with our students at the public university, where students are struggling. Some of them are the first in their household to go to college. Some of them are suffering from COVID, or their families were suffering from COVID. They're dealing with tuition problems. They're dealing with health problems. They're dealing with employment problems. Some of them are undocumented. I mean, there is so many issues. And we were actually bringing something to San Francisco State University that even elite universities spend thousands and thousands of dollars to do. And none of our speakers ever even thought about asking for money. I mean, they asked us if Layla Khaled got paid, and we started laughing because she would have felt insulted if actually anybody, but none of them ever even asked about that. They gave their time and they came. We're bringing all these incredible people with their, you put them together, thousands of years of experiences and history to meet with our students. And our students were so excited. There were 600 students in a club, in a chat room online at Students for Justice in Palestine, just waiting to attend. We had 14,000 people on Zoom signed up. We have over 4,000 people on Facebook interested and so on. Because first of all, people like celebrities. Let's admit. Secondly, this was the group, all the group together, the 5 people, each one of them has 100,000 stories, right? So, they were all coming and attending. 3, they were actually contrasting knowledges, that it wasn't just the Palestinian experience. It wasn't just education. It wasn't just imprisonment. It wasn't just the ANC. It wasn't the Zionist Jews. It wasn't US prisoner. It was all of the stuff that was going to come together. This was unacceptable for the Zionists. The Zionists were not going to allow it to happen. Okay, now, why is it that the university then, and why is it that many of our colleagues in women, gender, and sexuality studies and in ethnic studies either contested or said nothing or did not have our backs? I would say the question is that has to do with the ways in which the academy, some of these disciplines or interdisciplinary projects have become so institutionalized and so established that they forgot, or they choose to forget, to engage in collective amnesia, not to think about what are really the issues that started these programs in the first place. So they talk about what happened in the history and then they stop, because it's not supposed, the history is not supposed to inform the present and direct the future. The history is only in the history, in the past. We don't, that was really great, wonderful. We're only going to talk about the 4 groups that ended up becoming the 4 departments in the College of Ethnic Studies, specifically because the university wanted them to be that way. And because at that time, there were people who can take these positions. It was a particular response to a moment in history. It wasn't the design of the people who led the strike to start with. But then it becomes sort of like the outcome, the result actually becomes sort of like the cause célèbre that justifies the status quo and the continuation of repression. And these are kind of like really, I mean, it's mind-boggling when you think about them, and we see how people actually scramble to support this and justify and legitimize silencing and affecting themselves too, because if Tomomi and I cannot actually have control over the content of our classroom, if Zoom is justified by our university president that it's a private company, it can silence us, what does this mean for everybody else? Are you going to be able to have whatever you want? Or every single time you say something on Zoom, and I don't know if it's a coincidence, but a lot of the time when they not like it, things slow down, it gets bogged down, the internet stops, all of this stuff happens and so on. I don't know if it is somebody in a control room doing it or some coincidence or whatever, but I don't know. And I don't really want to think about conspiracies, but I do know that they silence us. That's a fact. That's not actually mythical conception. What does this really mean for everybody else? Are you going to be told you're going to teach a lesson in mathematics or environmental degradation, or are you not allowed to, like Texas or like everywhere else, when all of this stuff is being stopped? It's not. So I would just say, like, the crux of the matter for me is that the lesson is that the Palestinian exception is used as an exception by the Zionists and constructed as an exception in order for it to be the weakest link that will actually follow on everybody else. And if people don't wake up and don't understand what is happening out of their own interest, material and immaterial interest, it's going to be shutting down for everybody. It's not just for us. Not to mention that in its own merit, it shouldn't happen anyway, because it's very, very important topic to teach about.
That I see that Tumome has raised a hand, and I want to just sort of reinsert into the conversation the question about what this means writ large for teaching in the post-COVID era, if that's something that's on your list, Tumome.
I just had a wish, like a brief, I mean, like a minor point, but maybe not minor in the content. And to follow up on what Rabah was saying, that I think that our open classrooms, like I just have to say, like all students actually wrote really, really positively about the open classrooms, and they totally get it, and like the message that we are sending, and like they are the ones like who are connecting, you know, like say like already like Rabah mentioned, like connecting to Angela Davis, Audre Lorde, Assata Shakur, you know, Harriet Tubman, all these feminists whom they are learning in the other parts of the syllabus, and then connecting them back to our open classroom. And they all say like, you know, they have never learned, you know, that this Palestine anti-colonial movements and feminism, and like they like are very much kind of, I mean, they did express like the frustration and like even like anger that they haven't had a chance to learn all these things. And so it was a very, I mean, like I have been teaching this course many years, and like these are like large intro classes, like with so many different backgrounds, and like it's hard to teach, right? Like at those classes, but it was just a very like amazing, like how students responded so strongly with the class. And I just think that that is why this class is suppressed, because the message is very clear, and students really, you know, like students, many of them coming from working class, like, you know, like SFSU, they totally get the message. And so I just wanted to add that. So, and I know your question, but maybe someone could start. And
I'm just wondering if our colleagues who are joining us, like Steve, Rodi, Charlotte Cates, Hanan Dudin from National Students for Justice in Palestine may want to actually like either respond directly or make your own intervention and discussion, because this is a roundtable. So we're all, and then I'm sure maybe Miraz will ask questions, but you know, we can go
Sure,
back
I'll
to
jump in if you want me to. Thanks. No, thanks for inviting me. It's really an honor to be with all of you. I should say that I'm coming from a different perspective, just disciplinarily. I'm a teacher and student of East Asia. And so my academic career has been focused on that. And as Rabab said, I became involved in the CS4AF, which is an organization in California devoted to academic freedom, defending it. And that's how I came to know Rabab through the executive committee, and got, you know, very involved in a number of issues, both this particular one, but also related, many of them related to Palestine, but some not. And it's been a great learning experience, of course, frightening, especially this past year, but it's really brought home the intersectionality of all of our struggles. And I think we've seen, you know, as all of you have said, the intensification of suppression efforts all across the board. You know, Palestine, I think, is the sort of core, or it's really the prime example of what can happen when we allow an exception to free expression, you know, whether it's in the academy or outside. But I've seen in my own particular niche the application of these techniques, these now well-honed practices of suppression in East Asia, because as I'm sure you all know, that we're going through a very intense ramping up of war hysteria and a kind of demonization of China in particular that is having many ramifications across the world. And it's quite frightening. Currently, the reason I'm drinking so much tea is that it's only 6 a.m. in the morning where I am in Japan. But you know, this part of the world is experiencing a major crisis that I don't know if everyone is aware of, but it's you know, pretty scary in terms of what it could lead to. I mean, a nuclear confrontation, really. And we've seen it in academia as well, because I've been very surprised at how easily my own colleagues in my field, in the field of Asian studies, have been lulled into silence, I think through years of neoliberal propagandizing as well, and have either been silent or maybe even convinced by some of the steady drumbeat of anti-China propaganda that has been spewing out of our media and really even academic organizations over the past decade or more. So I'm very interested in connecting all of these struggles together. And I've been involved, you know, on the academic side through CS4AF, but I've decided I needed to go beyond that, and I've become pretty involved in Code Pink over the past year because I want to connect with the community as well, and you know, engaging in work to try to stop this, really, it's a tidal wave, it's a tsunami of forces that are pushing us in the direction of conflagration. And I want to work, I see Palestine really as very much part of the struggle. China, as you probably know, is developing a lot of economic and political and cultural connections across Asia, stretching into the Middle East, and really actually doing a lot of interesting things in Syria and Iran and elsewhere that promise, you know, I think a fundamental reordering if it ends up, you know, being able to overcome this U.S. or really it's a white nationalist tide sweeping parts of Europe and Australia certainly too. So I see us as working on all fronts, and that's locally too, because San Francisco, of course, is one major node in this struggle, and it has been quite scary in my neighborhood, and I'm sure many of you have seen this too, and wherever you are. One of the first murders of Asian Americans occurred about I don't know, less than a year ago, and there's just been a real it's a very scary development, I think, to see how people have responded to the kind of hysteria that has been whipped up, you know, throughout society, from the top to the bottom. So that's where I'm coming from, and I'm really happy to be involved in any way I can in this particular struggle at San Francisco State, but of course across academia too, whether it's Palestine or the other neoliberal and sort of I think it's a capitalist campaign to roll back the forces that are really bringing about a rethinking of you know, Euro-American hegemony over the past century. So anyway, that's my response. Very scattered, but hopefully we'll have some relevance. Thank you.
Thanks. I'm wondering if anybody else is prepared to jump in. Folks who just joined or who joined in the last few minutes, you're very welcome and invited and requested to offer your thoughts.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me with the headphones? I actually, on that point, sorry, of connection, I I went into revolution books in Berkeley just the other day. I was looking for a book on like local San Francisco, sort of Berkeley Bay Area history, radical history, and I found these that were for sale. And these were Persian translations of Maoist works. They're all pamphlets in Persian. One of them actually is in Arabic. These were obviously sponsored by China in the 60s and 70s and traveled everywhere. And well, all I know is that there's like an inscription on the back of someone called Masood who owned these. So I can only imagine the kind of, when we were talking about you were talking about the 60s and 70s, the kind of like real, you know, traveling of ideas and connections and links that, you know, were so central to, I guess, the solidarities of that time. And I'm sad that I missed the first part of this two-part session, so I probably missed out on quite a lot there, but I was just wondering, I'm from the UK, and we have we have the same thing really happening there. We had like an interesting development a couple of years ago where BRISMUS, the British Society for Middle East Studies, passed a BDS resolution. It caused a lot of drama. The old sort of guard, if you like, of the leadership all left, and a kind of new activist leadership came in, which was really, it was, a small kind of struggle in the bigger sort of frame and scheme of things, but really important in terms of having a kind of institutional space where now there's a lot of effort to actually promote sort of pro-Palestine sort of positions on things. We have things like that in the UK, but we also had in the last couple of weeks, I'm sure you probably know David Miller, who is an academic who he's been subject to a campaign for many years, and Bristol University finally investigated and dismissed him. And the statement is really interesting because they actually find that he, according to objective academic freedom standards, whatever those look like, he is not guilty of, doing any wrong there. Actually, he upheld his rights to academic freedom, but the second to last paragraph of that statement says it is a public interest matter. And so taking into account those kinds of sensitivities, they have chosen to dismiss him. So when you look at how it was reported, particularly with sort of Israel-related newspapers and magazines online, it's very much, the narrative is very much, this is just the tip of the iceberg. And now that Miller's gone, we're going to campaign and continue to go after other identified academics. So I think, I don't really know what the US situation is like as much, but I think it's obviously it's a lot worse in the US, I think, than it is in the UK. But it's I think for us, we're really heading in that direction, and that's kind of, it's really scary, and has this effect of intimidating and silencing, and those of us who do work on Palestine or related topics, you feel surveilled. It's not direct, but you just worry oh, well, if I'm presenting in a conference, someone's in this room, are they going to misread what I'm saying about women liberation fighters in the 70s, because that's the topic of my research, right? So I just think, I guess, how do you think the kind of transatlantic stage for all of this is kind of, what direction is it moving towards, and maybe what can we learn from each other in terms of I guess pushing back and organizing around it. Thank you for your comments.
Okay, can I know I'm waiting for you, Maya, but I can actually, it's
Sorry.
very interesting. No, that's why it's very interesting because, you know, with Steve, when there was, all of a sudden there was the whole like explosion of more anti-Asian violence, including online and everything. And we actually connected because one of the things that happened was the cancellation of study abroad programs. I mean, this was at the height of Trump. And the whole attack against like accusing Asian people of being responsible for COVID. It was, I mean, amazing what was going on. And all of a sudden, SFSU cancels, University of San Francisco cancels. They start canceling study abroad that are in China, all of a sudden kind of like connecting and claiming that, of course, they have the right to do that because it's private. So if it is not, if they don't want to do it ideologically, they use it for private reasons and so on. So I'm just basically like speaking back and talking about how that also was fed and continues to feed anti-Asian racism, violence, and so on. For Maral, I wanted to kind of like, I have similar books in Arabic, not only about Mao Zedong. The other day, I was actually going to, yeah, I like when I want pictures of all of them. I actually was looking at, and this is part of the cost that these attacks happen because I have the book that's not written by Mao Zedong, by Lenin on حول كومونة Paris, on the Paris Commune. And we had actually visited the cemetery of the Paris Commune back, I mean, a few years ago in France. And I was actually going to sit down and write something about it. And this is also part of kind of like what, maybe it also follows up on the discussion from the last panel about what does it mean when you're taken out from what you are trying to do. And then all of the kind of like you start dealing with all these battles. I know about the Christmas battle because also we were very much part of the AUT, the Social University Teachers, when they started debating BDS. And then there were also, like if we're talking about some people in ethnic studies or women and gender studies towing the line and upholding the institutions. At that point, it was the president of Al-Quds University, the Palestinian president with Al-Quds University, along with the president of the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, the Israeli and Palestinian, went to London to actually fight against AUT together, against placing sanctions on Israel and boycotting Israel for violating international law. We're not even talking about even bigger things, just mere things about international human rights law and so on. So the question of David Miller is also very similar to what happened with Stephen Salaita. And it also very much connected with the battle against Jeremy Corbyn and against trying to do justice for Palestine. And I think the language, the whole question of what defines public matter, who defines what the public interest is. And I think one of the things is that it's really scary that the Zionists are actually able again, just like with the Balfour Declaration, they're able again to come back and actually say, this is what the public interest is. But also it's very, very interesting because it also raises questions for us of what does the public mean? It actually makes us identify that these things are happening everywhere and again. But secondly, I think it's really important to think about history because at one point in the United States itself, slavery was legal, segregation was legal, Nazism was legal, killing Jews was legal. I mean, all of this stuff was legal at one part of the play, and people fought against it. The question really for all of us now, not only as intellectuals and academics, but also as people who are centering justice in our production of knowledge and so on, do we really have to wait until so many atrocities, more atrocities get committed before we actually stop and say, this is not in the public interest? And what you define as the public interest, because you have the pressure, because you have the connections, because you have the Israeli securitized industry, and because you have the collaboration between the US, Israel, Britain, and other parts of the world in the post 9/11 2001 world, which everybody is considered the war on terror and which draws on Islamophobia, Orientalism, racism, and so on, that this defines what public is. That's not what defines public is. And actually, how are we all going to be able to reclaim what public is and actually put ourselves not exactly in the same moment of 68, because no moment is the same as other, but actually contest and challenge that, not only at institutions, but also outside of the institution. How can we do that? that these are connected with each other, that you cannot, post 9/11, 2001, there was actually a very disturbing moment at one point in that the immigrant rights movement, the discussion and the demonstrations were carrying posters that said, we're not terrorists, we're not Muslims, we're Christians. That was actually really scary because it was the system pitting one struggle against another. And I think we've come a long way because nobody in immigrant rights movement, nobody in the undocumented movement, nobody who's fighting actually, on the contrary, there is so much collaboration and connection between people who are fighting against the walls, whether the wall is the wall of death between the US and Mexico, whether we talk about the apartheid wall, whether we're talking about the wall that India is building to reign in Kashmir, or Turkey, or the wall that the Europe is building in order to prevent people from Sahara, sub-Saharan and Africa to immigrate, to actually like not even rectify, even make up a little bit for the histories and years and many centuries of colonialism and exploitation and kind of like pillaging the wealth of people of Africa, Asian, Latin, the third world and indigenous people. So I think when we're thinking about that and we're thinking about what they are, well, I think it's really important for us to think again, what do we need to do? And I kind of like really want, unless other people want to speak, about talking about the solidarities that we have built, not only about repression. So we can do the two, but I think there is so much solidarities that have been done that sometimes we kind of lose sight. The reason that Tumumi and I are still here today and breathing, and breathing and smiling, it's been a very rough year. It's been really, really, really rough. Is because every single time we felt that we were attacked, and every single time some of our colleagues, and by the way, the reason I mentioned this, the Al-Quds University, is because it's not unusual. So it's not like other people too. There are people in all communities who do that, decide to kind of side up with the system. And because for them, this is their interest. This is the way, short and long term. What is it? Because people have gotten our back every single time, including at ASA, including at this session here, and so on. And then we can talk about what ASA should do based on this resolution, and how do we think about kind of like solidarity is not charity, right? But I think maybe I see there are a couple of students from National Students for Justice in Palestine who joined us, whom I love and adore, and SVP. And so, but not to influence what you're saying, but maybe other people have other things to say, and then we can come back and talk about with the unions and what does it mean to teach, because I know you've asked several times, Imaya, what does it mean to teach in not only in the era of COVID, but in the era of online, in the era of the control of these private giants, tech companies over our life. But I think maybe we can talk about maybe one thing and then come back. I don't know, either way. But just wanted to say this.
SJP folks, would you like to comment on the strategy and SJP's engagement and some resistance?
Hey, so sorry, yes. So just to clarify, I joined a little late, so I'm like still trying to catch up, I think, but is the question strategies for resistance of the censorship that like happens because we are online and like through corporations like Zoom, etc.?
I think first it would be great if you wanted to introduce yourself, and then I think if you're able to speak or interested in speaking about SJP's work on this particular sort of instance of resistance, that would be great. And if there is if you have a sort of broader sense of how SJP is thinking about online as a venue, as a site for this struggle, I think that's definitely super of interest as well. But why don't you start by just introducing yourself?
Okay, awesome. Give me 1 second. Can you all hear me okay?
Yeah.
Awesome. Hi everyone. My name is Roa, she, her pronouns. I am with National SJP, and I also worked with Butler University for Justice in Palestine when I was there before I graduated. But I can start by answering the question and then maybe pass it to Hanan if you have any additional thoughts. Okay, awesome. So first of all, we love you too, Dr. Kebab. And it was so honored to be able to support you with this. But I think, you know, with this, we have tried to do all that we can to utilize like our platforms to support. I think luckily, like we have a well-established website, we have a social media following, we have like the technological tools to be able to support in this resistance. And so, you know, we were able to set up like the email blasts that went out. We are like posting everything on our website. And then also just like using our social media to bump this as much as we can. And I think as far as how SJP is approaching like the online context, I think that's a really great question. And we've actually, you know, we've had a ton of local SJPs reach out to us about that because, you know, so censorship is obviously like a big part of it, but then like even also not knowing who's in the room because you're online has been something that has been making, I think, SJPers feel more hesitant. Like I know when I was at Butler, we would have, you know, people join and like change their name and, you know, just like all these things. So you never actually knew who you were talking to. And so I think, one way that we approached like that sense of maybe instability or insecurity and how we've been talking to SJPs about it is just like, you know, it is scary, right? Like not knowing who's listening, not knowing who's recording, not knowing who's like taking what. But when we speak, we have to be confident that no matter what we're saying, whether there's a Zionist, whether there isn't a Zionist, like no matter who's in the room, like we know we are right? And like we know what we are saying is the truth, and we know that we are fighting for justice, right, and liberation for all. And so being confident not only in our politics, but in the way that we are presenting things, right? Like making sure that we are presenting things in a way that avoids, I mean, obviously Zionists do whatever they want, but like avoids Zionists twisting our words as much as possible. But I think I'll pass it to Hanan. I don't know if you have any additional thoughts on that.
In terms of, my name is Hanan Tadine. I'm organizing with NSJP this year, and I've organized with SPHR, Students for Passing Human Rights at UBC in Vancouver for a couple of years now. But I just wanted to add on to what Ru'a is saying and what I'm sure you guys have been doing for a while is we are currently in a foundational phase of NSJP, and we're trying to figure out how we can move from these grapevine connections that we have into making them into more of a legitimate thing that students can kind of fall back on and lean on. I know for me personally, just after 2 months of doing a lot of work with NSJP, I now have connections with journalists and authors, and obviously, so our entire board of directors, of which Dr. Rabab is a member of, like these resources that are so valuable, and we have them and we've had them for such a long time. NSJP has so much power that we are constantly trying to get a grip of, but it's just a process of how can we put that onto paper? How can we put that onto our website? How can we do all of these things? All the resources that we've been gathering over the last couple of years, how do we put this on our website without being censored or flagged or a Zionist finding this website? Canary mission for another thing, you know, like hiding our faces, hiding our names when we're on things. How do we take all these resources that we've gathered after years and years of activism and organizing? I know Ru'a has done her own, I've done my own. Yani, we'll be in a meeting, Ru'a would be like, oh yes, my SJP used this 5 years ago. Hey, let's use this. And oh, I use this. And it's just the struggle in us being able to create our network has been and only ever has been security. How can we do all of this? How can we upload all of this information? Because really, like it's in between our fingertips. The amount of information that we are privy to is just, it's insane. And I always look at it during our meetings and I say, like, if we could make this public, like, yes, centralizing and democratizing our information. If we could make this public, like we would be, you know, Samir said in our meeting the other day, he said, be liberation by Christmas. And it's so funny because it's so true, the amount of information that's, because I've been working with NSJP a little less than I have been working for my local action, but my local action has always been starved for resources and starved for professors that will even take a look in our direction. And then there's obviously those professors that will say, oh, like, I am supportive, but will never show face at an event or never speak to us again. Or it's just kind of this awkward relationship that we have with people on campus. So NSJP has so much, and we are working so hard this year to make sure that all that we have to offer, we can offer to all other, as all that we've offered Dr. Abab in this movement, we can offer to all other SPHRs and SJPs across North America. And how can we grow our transnational presence? I know, Maral, you mentioned that you're from the UK and you've studied in the UK. How can we grow our transnational presence? That's something we have begun to think about, but I will be honest, our conversations have been very limited about. We've thought about growing transnationally, but how we do that, who can help us do that, all great questions that we have yet to answer. So I'll pass it on to Dr. Rabab. I see you have your hands up.
You muted yourself.
I'm sorry, Tomomi or Amaya, did you want to say something? Okay, so I just wanted to actually, I'm so glad we're having this conversation. I've been thinking about it a lot. So I want to say a few things. One is that definitely the whole question of security, and I think this is historically grounded too. Since before its inception, and since its inception, Israel has considered question of security and public relations to be very, very important. And if you look at all the assignment of the quote unquote foreign ministry, Ministry of Defense or War, Mossad, Shin Bet, everything, it always has been, the two of them were so much connected with each other. I mean, before Israel goes and tortures the Palestinian prisoner, they actually prepare the rap of how they're going to play it. And by the way, I'm kid you not, because when we were on the prisoner delegation, we attended a session, a tribunal for 3 Palestinian youth prisoners in Ofra. And we all went and we got permission, we had to submit. And then the judge, the Israeli military judge, basically says, are you the American delegation? Perfect English. He hands us a whole piece of propaganda about a few pages. And they also don't, I mean, it's all lies. A lot of it is actually does not even hold up light to the military orders that they publish, that you can just easily look them up online. But then proceeds to actually deny the young Palestinian kids who are under 16 years old the ability to have proper translation of the charges they're accused of. And I mean, people were shocked in the delegation. There is another story about how these young kids resisted. Like one of them basically turned his back to the judge and started talking to his father. How is my mother? Please make sure that you get me the t-shirts. Please get me the, because he knew there's going to be something. Because it was all a lie. I mean, even the way that the place they were charging him, he wasn't even there. I mean, it doesn't really matter. But it has always been, the two things were very much connected with each other. And one of the things that I'm actually, you know, kind of like, I don't want to say happy about, because nobody likes the repression more, but I think the feeling of security, because I do remember, I came from Palestine. So I grew up under occupation and I grew up under Jordanian rule. So I know exactly that you don't joke. You don't make a joke on the phone. You don't make a joke in a meeting. You don't make a joke about anything anyway. And when I came to the US, everybody's joking left and right. I'm like, what's wrong with you people? Like, why you, I mean, you know that this joke is going to land you in prison, and people do not think of the sense of humor as actually a sense of humor. You're going to be sent. And so I think the fact that there is heightened understanding is one issue. But the other thing is that this is institutional, this is structural. So no matter what NSJP is going to do, no matter what I will do, no matter what Tomomi Kinakawa or Amaya Gilman or Steve Roddy or Charlotte Cates or USI, all of us will do. This is a very big international, you know, struggle. And Israel has a huge, I mean, it's so invested in it. The trolling of students, the minute any student says something, all of a sudden, it's already, the mechanism is already set, and you know this is what happens. And I know this is what you're also like letting other students in NSJP, especially new students who join, know that the minute you say something, all of a sudden, the complaint is going to your university. All of a sudden, your university, quote unquote, HR person who is in charge of the Title IX, usually they come under Title IX, but they're actually dealing with everything else. It brings you in, starts prosecuting you. They are the judge, they are the prosecutor, they are the ones who actually pass the jury, they pass, and then you kind of start getting investigated. And then what do you do as a student? This is really the problem, because if you make waves, you know it's going to affect your career, because you know whether we fight against Canary Mission, they are going to put your name. And when you apply to grad school, when you apply for jobs or whatever, and it happened with our students, happens everywhere, we know this. So they have this system whereby they intimidate people left and right. And then one of the questions is that, and I don't really know what the answer is, because if you choose to fight, look, I'm a good example of this. I'm choosing to fight publicly and so on, but they really actually try to take the very breath out of you. I mean, they try to do that, right? So it's just a question of kind of like, we all come together, we struggle together and so on. We don't allow them to do that. But they're really nasty. The reason they are nasty, and they're going to get nastier. And I think this is really sort of like a blessing and a curse, because Israel is losing. And it's not only in public relations, losing in this historic project to crush Palestinians, to realize there is no land without people for people without land. It's not working. It failed. It failed. Over 100-year project has failed. But at the same time, its apologists then become vicious, more vicious, and bullies become bullier. As long as you don't hold them accountable. The question of holding accountable, it's an issue. How do we do that when there is all these structures in our various universities that legitimize and justify what Maral was talking about, in the sense of what happened with David Miller, what happened with Stephen Salaita, what happens everywhere, to the point that universities are willing to make a settlement just to make the problem go away, right? So it's kind of like, because the site in its very self, in its very definition, the site is a neoliberal site, that the universities are sold and bought by donors and interests, and not all the donors are Jewish Zionists, they're Christian right-wingers, there is military groups, there is all these, all the people we don't like, all the bad people, they're all in it together. But I think they also really try to instill the fear. So I think for a student, for example, who goes to Palestine, I mean, some of the things is that, how are you going to go to Palestine? Because they'll put your name in the checkpoint, and it doesn't matter how much you clean your Facebook and you do your social media or whatever. At the end of the day, you're amateur compared to the big platform and of the mechanism of the Facebook and the Zionists and Israel and so on and so forth. So one of the questions to actually really expose more and more and connect with people who are doing all this other work, like really, this is goes without saying. But also I wanted to just even share something about one of our students. In 2018, I had a Nazi student in my class, that the students of color, undocumented students, they discovered the student, not me. They discovered because they saw a tattoo, a Nazi tattoo, white supremacist tattoo on his hand. So they came and told me, I said, come on, no way. And they said, yes. Showed me 250 posts in Facebook and Instagram by this guy. He even has a picture of a swastika tattooed on his abdomen. He has posts that say, calls Muslims with this, Muslim women with the C word, says bomb all Muslims, has Heil Hitler, says that only 4% of blacks has ever suffered from slavery, says all refugees should be bombed back. I mean, it's really violent. It's very nasty, the stuff on the message. We took it to the dean. I went with the students to the dean. The dean did not believe us. She questioned. So the students showed her the information. We struggled to kind of like say, this is really a threat to the students and so on. And then some of the students, and it wasn't really, I didn't really know about it, because if I knew, I would have never ever let students put something where they put his quote unquote criminal record, because I'm for abolition, so I don't like this stuff, right? But they put posters. So the dean immediately of the College of Ethnic Studies instructed the university police to come and take all the posters down, saying that there is Nazi on campus. Then the university brought in the Nazi and counseled them about his rights. In my own class, we had to cancel all our open classrooms, because while we could do events off campus and get security from the community, on campus we have no control. It's the university police that can. They're the ones who do it, and they have collaboration with Israel and so on. Compared with a few years ago, a Palestinian student had posted when he was very, very young, even before he came to college, some post that the Zionists found objectionable and violent and so on. The university investigated him with the FBI and the Israeli consulate, and they banned him off campus for a year. and made him resign from joining of Palestine students and so on, while the Nazi continued to be able to take classes and graduate. So, and everybody knows this. The story has been written about in the student paper. Everybody knows about it. And then Campus Watch took it and said, oh, Abdul Hadi is a student Nazi in her class. He gets an A because he loves Palestine. I'm like, seriously? Haven't you seen all the quotes? I mean, it's something that it continues happening. So the question is, will something like this happen? How do we get ahead of the information in order for us to face that? The last thing I would say in terms of my own classrooms, I have to say that even as fierce a Palestinian as I am, and I speak my mind and so on, I always think before I respond to any post of students online around Palestine. I immediately respond about Black lives. I immediately respond about indigeneity. I respond on everything, homophobia, sexism, everything. But when it comes to Palestine, I have to tell you that I know that that I have to think multiple times before I say something. And it's not because it's because it is a reality. It is a reality that even without us, I've been vindicated multiple times of accusations of anti-Semitism and so on. So much stuff, including we defeated them in court. It doesn't matter. They're going to keep coming again and again. So I think the question is, in the age of online teaching, in the age of everything online and so on, I mean, in person, it could happen as well. And it could happen, it happens all the time, but it's more likely online. What do we do? How do we actually organize in order for us to be able to protect ourselves, our own, and make the classroom a space where students can also speak, the students and the faculty as well. Our rights are protected, and we're not always afraid of saying anything or doing anything because of what we think. I mean, I'm not saying something, the last thing I would say is that we're not allowed to make mistakes. And I think this is a huge, huge, huge issue, that it doesn't matter. We are not allowed. I'm not saying it's okay. It's not okay, but we are not allowed. Everybody else is allowed to make mistakes. But because the Zionists exceptionalize Palestine, it's not exceptional, but because they exceptionalize Palestine, we're not allowed to make mistakes. We're not. We're just not allowed to make mistakes. And so even our own, and this is one of the things that I think it's really one of the major tasks to do now, even among our own movement and so on, we have to resist that. And this is one of the lessons from our classroom is that, and I said this before, is that people will say, hey, what were you thinking? I mean, people say, "Min aqlek?" Really? Are you crazy? You're hosting Layla Khalid. I'm like, why not? Why can't you host all the figures? Every single figure who's alive then, who's still alive now, I would like to host them. I'd like them I'd like students to ask them questions. I would like them to have, let's say, Arianna Faraci, who was an Italian fascist, journalist. She had a book called Interview with History. She interviewed everybody, a lot of Palestinian leaders and so on. I would like students to be able to have this experience. It would be really great for them to do that. Why is that not allowed? And I have to tell you that when the students issued that petition to support us, to support me and Tumomi on change.org about this, a lot of people did not sign. A lot of people also from our own communities were afraid because they were saying, some of them had to do with disagreements with Layla Khalid's politics and history and so on and so forth. Some of it were very afraid. Some of it had to do with the politics of respectability. What is allowed and what's not allowed to talk about. And I say everything should be allowed to talk about. There shouldn't be any taboos. We should be able to talk about everything. This is where we think, this is our mind. Why are we trying to actually put ceilings on what we can think? But I think this is a very big issue that we really need to challenge, and we should not allow it to happen. So
I think on that note, we have to end because we've run up over our time, and we got a very stern note from ASA to keep the room open for the next set of people. So thank you so much, everyone, for being here. And we recorded the session, and hopefully we'll be able to figure out a way to use all these ideas. Thank you so much, especially Rabab and Tumomi, for all your work and stalwartness on all of this.
And thank you, Amaya, for doing such a great job of moderating and leading us.
It was nice to meet everybody, and see you soon.
Hi, everyone.